This is changing a lot because of the interventions that we're doing with our kids. It used to be said that 80% of children with autism do not speak. That has changed incredibly because of the early intervention we're doing now. More and more of them are talking early. Their speech still is somewhat impaired or delayed, but at least they're able to communicate verbally. They use unusual communication. We call it echolalia, where they echo you. You know, you say, hello, John, how are you today? How are you today? And really, that's the child's effort to talk to you. Autism, the very word comes from the word self, which means automatic. Within yourself, automatic means it can do it itself. Automobile, self-mobility. Autism comes from that same root word, which means that these kids are really drawn within themselves. So sometimes they echo because they're not really listening to the rest of the community as far as how to speak. We all learned how to talk because we were around people that were talking, and we listened and we observed and we learned how to act, we learned how to speak and everything. These children are so encapsulated within themselves that they're not doing that. So part of our work is to help them to understand how to communicate. There's a lack of gestures, you know, like most kids will say, come over here and do all this. Kids with autism, they may learn to say, come over here, but there's no gestures with that. There's a lack of what we call reciprocal communication, back and forth communication that we take for granted. But kids with autism, they may be telling you about their favorite thing. We had a kid that loved World War II. He would tell you everything about World War II. But if you said, I have a headache, or I don't feel good today, he would just continue telling you about World War II. So it wasn't a reciprocal communication. It was very one-sided. And they have difficulty expressing their needs. They may want something, they may need something, but they have difficulty with that intentional communication. So that's some of the things that we work on at the center. Social skills is a big part. Poor social interaction. They don't interact like other kids. And of course with children, if you don't interact, you're going to be the child by yourself. If I go to any playground and you look out at recess, you will see the child with autism, because that will be the child in the corner playing in the sand doing this. You know, he'll be alone because he has poor social interaction. So part of our work at Soaring Eagles is to teach them how to play. That's kind of fun because we can go back in our childhood and I'm playing games I haven't played in years. You know, so that's kind of fun. They have difficulty, again, with social reciprocity, the give and take of everyday human interaction. You know, how we, you know, when you listen to two boys play, if you listen real good, you see that there's some reciprocity going on. One is like, okay, I'm going to be Superman. Oh, okay, then I'm going to be Batman. And you hear this language going back and forth. With children with autism, you may not see that. They may be sitting there, and they may be both playing with one playing with Batman and one playing with Superman, but there's no interaction between them. There's no reciprocity. And they have limited or impaired plays, I just commented. And of course, if you don't know how to play, you're going to be left alone. Children move on, you know, and that's why part of our work is that we teach them how to play so other children will want to be around them and play with them. Behavior. Restricted interest, as I talked about our student that loved World War II, and he would always be talking about, I mean, that was his interest. He'd walk in the door, and I could be in the middle of a conversation, and he'll walk up to me and he says, Karen, the B-450 bomber is something that you need to understand. It was red and green, and he really just misses the whole point that I'm in a conversation with someone else. They use stereotype or unusual behaviors or ritualistics. We have a student that he has to turn around in a full circle before he sits in a chair. If he moves to another chair, he has to turn around in a full circle. That's his ritual. You know, so we have a lot of kids that have rituals that they for some reason, they have to do those things. They have obsessive behaviors. My son is obsessed with videos and books, especially Disney cartoon things and books to deal with the same amount. And he will, if it's your book, he'll take it. If it's your video, he'll take it. It's hard to take into other people's homes because he has mastered as to where you keep your videos. He knows in a home that the videos are kept in the cabinet around the television. He also knows that people keep their videos in their bedrooms. So he'll go to those places in someone's home looking for his things, and that's his obsession. He's obsessed with those kind of things. They also tend to have repetitive behaviors, doing things over and over again. Not really serving a purpose for them, but they may open and close the door, open and close the door, open and close the door. You know, And again, when we are diagnosing, I work on the autism diagnostic team here in Pueblo, and when we are diagnosing autism, we don't look for just behaviors, we have to look for these specific type of behaviors. If you see children that are doing things over and over again, they have obsessions, then you might want to, that might be a red flag that this child may have autism. Finally, we look at the sensory defensiveness. We find that the senses in kids with autism may be heightened or depressed, either one. We have kids that are very sensitive, like the lights here. I mean, we can barely hear these lights, but a child with autism can hear them because they're fluorescent lights, and they would hear the buzzing, and that would kind of agitate them. We try to create a sensory-friendly environment at Soaring Eagles. So if you come in, you'll see that the lights are kind of dim, and we try to create a nice environment for them. Some kids even have depressed senses. My son, for instance, has depressed senses. And all human beings need to feel something. You have to have some sense of touch. You know, from infancy, you need that. That's why nurses are supposed to hold a baby when you feed them. You can't just feed them in the crib. You should hold them because they need that sensory input. That's true for even kids with autism. And if they have senses that are depressed, you might find them doing odd things, like we have one little boy that puts his face up against the cold glass because he wants to feel the cold, or on the floor sometimes. So you'll find his head on the floor because he wants to feel the cold of the floor. We have kids that, my son in particular, will crash into drywall. He'll crash into the wall. I have learned how to repair drywall because I had to learn. Because he'll crash in and he'll leave a big hole and he won't even feel any injury to it. He went out to the backyard one day. He was out there playing in the backyard. Came in, I was putting on his shoes and socks after that, and he started limping. And I took off his sock, and he had lost an entire toenail, but never showed any sense of pain that he had lost his toenail until I put the sock on top of it, and he tried to walk on it. So sometimes they have depressed senses. And it may be, as I said, the underlying cause of some behavior. So if you see kids doing these odd behaviors that feed the senses, like they're hitting themselves sometimes, you'll see them doing kind of strange things, sleeping with the covers over the head real tight. That could be a sign of sensory processing or sensory defensiveness. Again, red flags for autism. Doesn't diagnose it by itself, but it's a red flag that you might be dealing with a child with autism. It's important to understand that autism is on a spectrum. Every child with autism can be different. So that's why we have to do assessments before we try to build a program. So all our children come in and they have to have an assessment. On one end of the spectrum, you have what we call Asperger's syndrome. You guys may have heard that. I think the short term they say ASPI, kids that are kind of ASPI. These are kids that can be quite brilliant, actually, as Chad was talking about, but they have problems with social skills. Like my student that had loved World War II. He was absolutely right on every single fact. He can tell you all the major players in World War II. He could tell you the color of the planes and how many were issued. And I stopped looking it up because every time I looked it up, he was absolutely right. So he was more of a student that had Asperger's syndrome. Even though he could talk very well, he was very intelligent, but the biggest problem with him was his social skills. And believe it or not, folks, if you have poor social skills, you're going to have a poor quality of life because you won't be able to have friends. You certainly won't be getting married. You probably can't keep a job. Can you imagine if he can't stop talking about World War II at the workplace, he won't keep his job. So again, part of our work with our Asperger's kids is teaching them appropriate social skills. Further down the spectrum, we have what we call PDD-NOS, pervasive developmental disorder. That's sort of, it's like autism, but the degree of all the autism symptoms are not as heavy on a child with PDD-NOS. Sometimes I hear people say, he's a little autistic-y, but at the same time he has okay social skills. That kid might be someone that has PDD-NOS. And then you have autism moderate, and that's full-blown autism, all the symptoms we just talked about. And then you have severe autism. Those are your children that are probably banging their heads. These are your kids that may have mental retardation. Some kids can have mental retardation along with autism. And some of our kids even have other dual diagnoses like fetal alcohol syndrome and autism. Down syndrome population has a high level of autism. In fact, of all the groups, Down syndrome has the highest rate of autism by like 25% of kids with Down syndrome are also diagnosed with autism. Language difficulties you see in autism. Let's see. Yeah, I must have messed up that slide too. Well, let me tell you, we already talked a little bit about the language difficulty, and the slide is not coming up. But they have difficulty with what we call intentional communication. You know, we mess with Brett here. Like, Brett has, say that was chocolate. I want Brett's chocolate. I don't see Brett as a person, because Brett isn't like an object. That's the way they see people sometimes. So I'm just going to take Brett's chocolate. But I have difficulty, even if I could talk, I have difficulty asking Brett, may I have some chocolate? Because I have difficulty with what we call intentional communication. They have difficulty with abstract language. A penny saved is a penny earned. They don't get that. Well, if you're saving it, how are you earning it? And, you know, some of those things. And I say this is, when I say this, I'm talking in generalities. There are some people with autism that have written beautiful poetry. You know, there are some people with autism that can create things that are abstract, but in general, they have difficulty with abstract language. They have difficulties with intentional communication. Next, as we look at the emotional difficulties of people with autism, they laugh and cry for no apparent reason. And that's why people thought years and years ago, decades ago, they thought autism was a form of childhood schizophrenia, because these kids would just be laughing and no one would know why they would laugh. They would cry and no one would know why they were crying. And what I have found working with these kids is that there's a reason. They're just not telling us what it is. You know, how many of us have been alone and we're laughing? And we're, you know, if someone asks us, well, what are you laughing at? Well, I just saw this episode last night. It was just so funny. And, you know, the Big Bang Theory was just so, how many watch the Big Bang Theory? Okay, Sheldon is Asperger's, okay? If you watch the Big Bang Theory, he's a person, picture of an Asperger's kid. So they do laugh and cry. There's a reason. They're just telling us and talking to us. They're aware that they're different. That can cause some emotional difficulties, especially with our kids that are Asperger's. Like this same student that loved World War II, he would ask me things like, Karen, how come no one wants to come to my house? How come I don't get invited to birthday parties? And he just didn't get that he talked about World War II too much. In addition, he would talk to you right here in your face. And when he's talking about World War II, and he would scare people because he talked really loud too. And he just didn't get that. His mother was always on the sidelines going like this, you know, trying to get him to lower his voice, because he didn't get that he scared his peers. And that's why they didn't want him around, you know. And as you remember, high school is a big social club. You know, if you're the strange kid, well, you're going to be left by yourself. And even the geeks, I was a geek, even the geeks had their own club. But our kids don't even have the ability to form their own club. So they tend to be alone because of their poor social skills. They have a lot of anxiety. You know, they're anxious about everything. Remember, they are into their rituals. If they can't do their rituals, they get real anxious. Substitute teacher, they get real anxious about it. And we try to teach people that if you're going to be out, if you're going to be not coming in the next day, tell the child with autism you're not going to be there. So they'll be a little less anxious the next day. They have difficulties even with depression. You know, again, our Asperger's kids in particular, they get depressed because they see everybody else having friends. And a lot of our kids have these social sisters. You know, I have a daughter that's real social. You know, people come to the house, she's going out and everything. And then when Matthew, not so much, but some of our other boys, if they look on and they see this happening and they're saying, well, no one's inviting me, I'm not going anywhere, that can cause a degree of depression. Not to mention all the stuff that they're going through in school because they're seen as the strange kid. They have behavior difficulties. We see a lot of tantruming. In fact, that's probably the number one reason why we're called, is because of the behaviors we see in our kids. They tantrum and they do all kind of, and they can tantrum, folks, for like an hour or more. Nonstop. I don't know where they get the energy, but they can go on and on and on, especially if it's something they want. Remember, they have obsessive issues. So if they're obsessed about something that they can't get to, they can tantrum for over an hour. They can do self-injury to themselves. They can hit themselves, bite themselves, do all kind of things, head banging. Aggressive behaviors can occur. And usually not because they want to hurt somebody per se. Usually the aggression comes in because you're blocking their obsession or their ritual. And that's why they'll come after you. Obsessive compulsive behaviors, as I said, and then self-stimulation behaviors. They flap, they chew. My son used to chew his shirts. I can show you shirts that he could chew up a t-shirt in a day just from wearing the shirt. Thank God Walmart had them for $3, you know, because we were going through a shirt a day because of the chewing that he would do. And basically it's to stimulate themselves. You see them doing this, they're trying to stimulate themselves again. Finally, you see the motor dyspraxia, poor fine motor skills because of lack of normal play. When you try to get them to write finally, as they get older and they get in kindergarten, you try to get them to write in color, you'll find that their hands shake because their muscles in the hands have not developed properly because they don't play like other children. The children, when they're playing and building blocks, they're actually building up the muscles in their hands, so when they get to school one day, they'll be able to write better. They'll be able to learn how to write. And they also have what we call oral motor difficulties, which is the muscles of the throat and the lips, the tongue, the lips, the vocal cords, all of those are muscles. So if you don't use it, you lose it. And it's very difficult when they start talking to get those in place. And very quickly, because I know we're running out of time. The epidemiology of autism, if you look at the epidemic, epidemiology is a study of epidemics. Autism is an epidemic in the United States and probably in some other countries too. And just looking at the numbers real quick, 1 in 500 children reported by the Centers for Disease Control in 1997. That was high back then. In 03, it went up to 1 in 250. 04 to 06, 1 in 166. 07, 1 in 150. If you just looked at the boys alone, it was 1 in 94 boys were being diagnosed with autism. In the United States overall, over 1.5 million Americans have autism. Autism rates have increased by 172% just in the 90s, and it's seen all over the world, not just in the United States. It's seen in England, Iceland, Japan. It's probably seen in underdeveloped countries, however, but I'll get you have a question?
Yeah, on that, is it autism, is it more prevalent or is it diagnosis is better, or both?
Well, everyone always asks that question. Yes, the diagnosis is better, but that can't account for all of it. You know, that accounts for some of the increase in the numbers, because these kids used to be written off as mentally retarded or behavioral problems. Now we can call it autism. But there's other things that are happening. They're even telling pregnant women don't eat fish because of our oceans that are polluted. And my personal feeling is that we live in a different world than we lived in years ago. We have all kind of pollutants in our air, all kind of pollutants in our water. Our food is different, all the additives in our food that we have today. And all of those could probably be playing a factor on why the autism rates are going up. So somebody else had a
I have a question. If we know families with an autistic child, regardless of where they're at on the scale, how can we support the parents? Because speaking as a parent, I would think it'd be very difficult to be the parent of a child with autism. How can we be supportive, or what can we do to help, or not do that you think you're being helpful and you're really not being?
You know, I think sometimes you can ask them, if they have other children, maybe you can help with them with the other children. Because usually the parents are consumed with that child with autism. It happens all the time. And the siblings, you know, and that's another lecture, the siblings often have issues. But you can ask them, what can I do to help? Can I take the other children? You know, because often the child with autism is going to have a hard time dealing with a stranger. But maybe you can take the other children, you know, and maybe, you know, it takes a lot of understanding because they can be destructive. Say they're at your house, you know, and he's in your bedroom looking through your videos, you know, and, you know, it just takes a lot of understanding, you know, and I think parents appreciate that, and I think
when you work with them, and I'm assuming that the things that you've learned about autism helps them.
Mm-hmm.
Does the level that you take them to, are you able to keep them at that level, or do they regress?
They regress if you stop the intervention, but they don't regress completely. They just regress some, you know, and that's why we do a summer program, so we can keep it going year round. But yeah, there can be some regression if you stop the interventions, you know, and that's why we want to keep it going even into adulthood, so that they can continue to grow in progress.
Just one last question. At Soaring Eagles, how young do you take these children?
We take them as young as 18 months. And the Children's Day program goes from as young as 18 months all the way up to 21. And On my last slide, well, we probably won't get to the last slide, but we bought our first building in 2010. The old Pueblo West Glass and Mirror, that's what we bought, and we renovated the whole place. So that's where we have our Children's Day program. We just bought the lots on either side of our building, so we can put in a playground on one side for our children, and we want to do adult services. So we've actually moved into adult services. We just do those on Fridays. So it can go on, and I'm going to get Brett and then.
Well, no, you answered my question.
Oh.
Don't you have a concert coming up to benefit Soaring Eagles?
Actually, we have, I think Betty was here a few weeks ago. We actually have a comedy night coming up in October. I heard you guys talking about Oktoberfest. Our event is October 12th. Hopefully that's not the same time you guys are having Oktoberfest, but it's a comedy night. That's our big annual fundraiser, and we raise money so that we can continue the work that we're doing. Soaring Eagles is a nonprofit organization, 501c3. All donations are tax deductible, and yes, that's coming up in October, our comedy night. So we appreciate your support in any way.
If you could get us information on it.
Oh, absolutely, we'll do.
What do you see after the kids do become adults? Does it slowly get better, or do they stay at whatever level they reach?
They do get better, and I'll tell you, I'll be honest, even without intervention, they do get better as they get older, but if they get intervention, they really get better. My son has learned to read, he's learned to write, he's learned simple mathematics, he's learned how to talk and how to communicate his needs. So, yeah, they do get better.
So they can hold a job?
Some of them can, and some of them can hold a job with support, and some of them may not ever work. But even if they don't work, it means the world to families, especially as parents like myself are getting older. It means the world that Matthew can do a lot of things for himself. You know, when he was a kid, I had to do everything for him, but now he's able to do more for himself. I still have to do a lot for him, but at least he can, you know, do a lot of things.
So they really haven't determined what causes it?
No, they haven't determined what causes it. I think there's going to be multiple causes. They have found gene markers for autism. Again, they think the heavy metals may have something to do with it in our environment. They thought vaccines, but vaccines didn't prove out as a cause. You know, and as a physician, I'll tell you, don't stop vaccinating the children, because then we go back to infectious disease was the #1 killer of children 100 years ago. We don't want to go back to that. But, and again, the research didn't show it was vaccines was causing it. But I think it's going to be multiple things.
You watch Parenthood?
The movie?
No, the TV
The
show.
show? No, I didn't.
Yeah, they have
Asperger's.
Oh, do they?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's pretty, the way you described it,
Yeah.
he is that kid.
Yeah.
He's a good, if he's not Asperger's, he's a.
If anyone else has any other questions, I'm sure
I know,
Dr.
sorry,
Bowen will stick
Andy.
around afterwards, but we need to.
I'm sorry.
we need to close. You're all right, you're fine. Thank you very much for coming. We appreciate it. We're on to our breakfast club before we test lunch. So thank you very much. I appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Andy. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
Oh, I have some handouts. If you guys want some Soaring Eagles brochures, we have some over there in our newsletter.
With that, Dick, would you like to lead us before we test, please?
Yes. Is it the truth?
Is it the truth?
Is it fair to all concerned?
Is it fair to all concerned?
Will it build goodwill and better friendship?
Will it build goodwill and better friendship?
Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Will it be beneficial